We're now working on getting the front fenders off. In order to do that, we first remove the hood, and that's a pretty simple exercise. There's 3 bolts right here on each of the hood hinges on each side. We removed those and lifted the hood off, no problem. Next thing is get the grill surround off. So the first thing I did there was pull the headlight bulbs out of their socket. And to do that, there's a little trim ring, and on that trim ring are 3 little square, they're actually hex nuts with a Phillips screwdriver, a regular, start over, cut that out. To do that, we'll first remove the headlight trim ring. Holding that trim ring on are 3 little bitty hex nut bolts with a regular screwdriver slot in it. So we pulled those 3 screws off. Once we got those 3 screws off, then you can pull the headlight out of the socket. It actually kind of falls out of the socket. And once you do that, the headlight retaining bucket is there, and it has a little spring-loaded hook that hooks into this little area right here, and then this too will just slide out of the retainers and come out of the hole. Once we got that done, we then came in here, and at the top of the headlight surround are 2 1/2-inch bolts, kind of hidden right in there. Naturally, one came out easy, and one I had to reach back in behind the grill and hold the nut. Same thing down below. There's 2 little bolts that go right down in there. Same thing, one came out easy, and one I had to put a wrench back in behind there to hold. Did the same thing on this side. 2 bolts there, 2 bolts lower. And then I cut 3 little bitty bolts that hold the grill on. There's one right here, and there's one right here that I got from the outside. There's one right down here. And on the very bottom, there's one holding that bracket up onto the grill. So once I got those loose, this grill should just lift right out of here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that grill out and move on to the next step, working those fenders off. Okay, one small step for mankind forgotten. I had to get the bumper off first in order to get the grill out. So I took the parking lights off. Each parking light's held on by 4 of these little special shoulder screws that holds the lens on. Once you get the lens off, there's a little Phillips head screw that screws through the bumper up into the parking light retainer, like so. So I pulled those off, and then there are 6 bolts that hold the bumper to the brackets, 2 on the frame horns and 1 on the outside. In this case, one of the bolts had been replaced. Each of these nuts are the little castellated slotted nuts. The one that's been replaced has the wrong nut on it, and it looked like the lower had this eccentric washer. Assuming that's to get lined up on the frame horn. So we'll get these all polished up and get the missing bolt replaced. On the outside, it had a number of washers here. None of these I think are supposed to be in there. They're all new. Looks like someone was just trying to shim out the bumper. But once I cut these bolts loose, bumper just came right off, no problem. And then I was able to take this grill and pull it forward like it's supposed to, and I'll go ahead and lift it out and set it aside. Here we're about to take the right fender off. I did a really nice explanatory video on how to get this fender that you could have watched had I started the video before I took the fender off. So now I'm going to do it again on this side. I've pretty much broken off the 2 bolts that I figured were not going to come loose, so we've got those snapped off. Now we just have a couple of bolts on this core support, a couple of bolts down lower. We got 3 bolts down holding the fender support, 2 bolts here, 2 bolts underneath there, and then we got these fender bolts across here. So I'm going to go ahead and spin these out And we should be able to lift this fender off just like we did the other one in the other video. By the way, if you're wondering which bolts I broke off with the standard break-off procedure, it was this bolt right underneath here. On both sides, it was rusted shut. And there's two bolts up underneath the fender that goes from the fender skirt up into the inside face of this fender. And then on both sides, those were also frozen, and I had to break them off. Like there's a little fender washer shim in this side, not one of those in the other side. Got one more somewhere. Right there. Fender looks to be in pretty good shape. Really no rust up out there, just surface rust. And once I get the rat's nest out of here, the other place we're going to be most prone to rusting out. You see this is just full of mud. Probably started accumulated in 1973. In spite of all that moisture in there, this really seems pretty solid. There's a little weep hole right there. I ought to let all that out of there, but it's not big enough. So, okay, looks pretty good. We're going to wheel it over here to the work stands and pull all the trim off, and then we'll be ready to sandblast. There you have it. Well, as you can see, we've now pulled the core support off the front, and with that, that concludes removal of the entire front clip off of this truck. Core support was relatively easy. Once we got the fenders off, there's a couple items that had to be removed. The two horns, little voltage regulator, some small things like that. But once we got that done, just removed two, it was double nutted, 2 3/4 inch nuts on the core support mounting bolts. They're carriage head bolts with a little rectangular washer that comes down through the top, through a rubber bushing to 2 nuts. Back those 2 nuts off without any problem. One on each side, and then the core support just lifted off. I went in and left the radiator in place because I want to roll it outside to drain all the fluids out of it before I cut it loose. But for the most part, we've got everything taken off of it, and now we're going to move on to what we have to do to prepare the cab to be removed. So I'm going to start, I believe, with removing this master cylinder and brake booster to give me a little more clearance to work around the steering components, and we'll drop the steering column out of the cab, pull the seats, may have to pull the seats first, and get the gas tank out, and then we'll work on the dash components to get this cab ready to remove so we can get it ready for sandblasting as well. So that's pretty much the front clip, and we're ready to move on.
Download the Resto-Rat app today to begin managing, tracking, and documenting your restoration project.